Prime Minister, Jeff Simons, honoured guest, ladies and gentlemen, friends of GOGA and friends of Guyana. Today is a very significant day. It's the first day of the inaugural conference of the oil and gas industry. And I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome our international, regional and local investors in the industry and potential investors. Guyana has had a long journey to this day, and we are honoured that we have reached a stage where, in collaboration with one of the finest companies in the world, Exxon, Repsol, and our friends in the Caribbean, we will be able to develop a long-term, efficient, competitive industry in oil and gas. We are optimistic about the future, and we are also keenly aware of the challenges that oil and gas will present for an economy that has had the history that Guyana has had since independence and before independence. We are honoured today to have with us His Excellency the Prime Minister, who has been part of Guyana's journey since independence to bringing it to the stage where, finally, that word that became a challenged word, potential, is about to be realised. We are happy to be here, and we believe that history has been very kind to allow us to be exactly where we are. Most of you have heard the optimistic news about the between the 800 and 1.2 billion barrels. I'm hoping that during the course of the upcoming weeks and months, Exxon, Repsol and the other operators will bring us even better news as we move forward. The Guyana Basin is a very, very special basin, and in terms of the location of oil and gas reserves globally, I believe Guyana is finally going to be able to take its position as perhaps leader in the region in the development of this industry. But this morning's introduction and presentation is not about GOGA, and it's not about Guyana. It is essentially how we're going to collaborate with you, our friends, in moving forward in establishing a sustainable, equitable, efficient and competitive industry for investment in Guyana. I would like to take the opportunity to welcome all our international and regional investors in Guyana, as well as to thank our local investors who have been here for a long time. Permit me, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome the CEO of GOGA, who will give a few brief remarks before we proceed to the feature address. Mr. Bobby Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Good morning, everyone, once again. Honorable Moses V. Nagamutu, Prime Minister and first Vice President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Directors of GOGA, Members of Parliament and other senior members of the public sector, other members of the diplomatic community, members of the private sector in Guyana, our sponsors, our exhibitors, our participants from the CARICOM region, South America, North America, and other jurisdictions, special invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the opening of the working session of the first Oil and Gas Conference and Exposition being hosted by the Guyana Oil and Gas Association, under the theme, The Initiation of a Transformative Industry. Whilst this forum is being facilitated under this theme, the presentations, papers, and discussions over the next 2 days will focus on four broad sub-themes, which are technologies for offshore development, environment, regulatory and safety standards, experiences from other territories, and business opportunities that can be developed right here in Guyana. Our topics of presentations and our presenters are from a wide variation of key players in the private, public, and international community. And GOGA wanted to put together an agenda that focused on the business development of the oil and gas sector here. And we do hope by these four key sub-themes that we have presented to you here on this agenda can allow us to further develop our knowledge and understanding of the business opportunities and the supply chain along the oil and gas industry to develop our local economy. Over these days, the full conference activities will see presentations and discussions from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, Halliburton, Total Tech of Oilfield Services Guyana Inc., Intec-C, Environmental Protection Agency of Guyana, Diverse HSC Solutions out of Trinidad and Tobago, Technip FMC, Elson Schwest Offshore. We'll also see presentations from Trinidad and Tobago by Mr. Kevin Ramnarine, former Minister of Energy. We'll see presentations from Suriname, from Canada. Maybe I'm heading somewhere with that. From Canada, we have Mr. Rob Strong, who's been working with the Guyana Oil and Gas Association for quite some time, and he will do a presentation on the experiences of Canada. We have a presentation from Peterson, and those of you in the oil industry know that Peterson just won a big contract over in Trinidad and Tobago. We have MI Swarco, EY Global Oil and Gas, Guyana Office for Investment, and we also have presentations and discussions which will follow during our dinner session and our two lunches by one of the former Premier of Alberta, Ms. Alison Redford, and our very own Minister of Public Infrastructure and Minister of Business. From the list that I've just presented to you, you can understand that what we try to do is to put together presentations and an agenda item that focuses not only on the development of the public sector, the private sector, but for us as people in the corporate world to see how best we can come together and work towards the development of the sector. GOGA would like to specifically thank its sponsors, who without them this event would not be possible here this morning and over the next 2 days, particularly our platinum sponsors, Massey Energy and Massey Group, EY, Edison Choice Offshore, Nalico, Nafico, and GBTI. Our gold sponsors include Halliburton, Eco Atlantic Oil and Gas, and Bayreuth from Trinidad and Tobago. Our silver sponsors include One Subsea, Frugo, Intec-C, Bristow, Tiger Tanks, GE. GOGA has over 23 exhibitors here this morning. These exhibitors are from Guyana and other parts of the world. And as indicated last night, we said that these exhibitors are here to showcase products that Guyana can offer to the oil and gas industry, whether it's here in Guyana or further afield, and the type of products that we will be getting into in the long run. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for being here this morning, and as we get into the working session, we hope that we will have fruitful discussions and a greater understanding of the Guyanese economy as it relates to this new economic pillar of economic development for us, and focus on how we can move forward together. Thank you.
The Honourable Moses Nagamutu, Prime Minister of Guyana, is what we would describe as a veteran in politics. He has been a long fighter for a better day in Guyana, and I think those struggles manifested themselves positively in his election to office in 2015. Moses has been a true patriot. He is committed to Guyana, he's committed to the development of Guyana, and he has sacrificed much where others have chosen other paths. We've had a very close personal relationship, and in another life we have campaigned for a better Guyana. Moses, it gives me great pleasure personally and on behalf of the Guyana Oil and Gas Association to invite you to deliver the feature address this morning at the commencement of this formal session. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Moses Nagamutu.
Good morning, members of the executive of the Guyana Oil and Gas Association, visiting dignitaries and guests, specialists in oil and gas, which I am not. I welcome you to Guyana, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the government and the people of our republic. As I said, I'm not in any way a specialist in this field, but as Nigel has said, when you're in politics, you ought to be involved in everything. And perhaps the closest I would have come to being familiar with oil and gas is when I was offered an opportunity to board an oil rig last week, and I was welcomed in a rather emotional way because the well over which the rig stands is named Snook, And immediately I felt at home because as a son of a fisherman, I had become very familiar with this fish on the Quarantine Coast. And so that's the nearest I got to feel that I was part of this oil and gas adventure. For many years I have worked, as you know, with several administrations. This is the fifth government that I'm participating in. I've become familiar with a kind of standoff as regards oil corporations and dealings with oil companies. At first it was like, beware of the oil corporations. Even though we suspected from our past that there had been exploratory work by the Canadian firms, United States firms, going back into the 60s, and we felt that we had come close to having disclosures that we were richly endowed with oil and gas. There has always been, for some reasons which have, of course, to do with our history, our political history, that we didn't open the door to companies that would want to take us forward and to actually realize our resources in a meaningful way. And then there was a period when I would have been participating in some discussions about CGX. I saw Duque somewhere around, that we took a very long time trying to figure out whether or not we wanted exploration in earnest to take place, because we have always been very zealous about our resources. We felt it was our resources, and there was no hurry to develop these resources. And of course there was a period when I recognized that apart from having a standoff, it was like bringing the oil companies in. And there was a tendency to open the door for all and sundry. And there has always been a risk, what has been described as not having the best deal if you didn't set up the institutional and legal framework. Because there's always been concerns about the oligarchy. And so I want to applaud Minister of Natural Resources, who was before Minister of Governance, Raphael Chotman, for taking an initiative while we were in Mexico in 2015 to start the conversation about open data, open information as regards our oil and gas potentials, and at the same time to seek out allies who would help us to develop the legal framework within which we would situate the production of oil and gas. And so I was delighted, having had the Department of the Ministry of Governance transferred to my portfolio, that one of the first initiatives that had been taken was to launch the Guyana EITI, where we felt that we needed not only to ensure that we have environmental impact assessment done and environmental protection, that the important thing for us was that our oil and gas industry should be characterized by transparency, by accountability, that we couldn't just extract our natural resources, our strategic natural resource, such as oil and gas, as well as timber resources, mineral resources and not be accountable. And so it was a move in the right direction that the Guyana Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative was launched here in Guyana some weeks ago. I had said then that side by side with organizations such as the GEITI, that we would need to guarantee that the infrastructure, the political infrastructure of Guyana is as such that you could offer support and give strength to the initiative to have transparent extractive industries, and the organizations involved should have some sense of responsibility, that the resources are not simply a matter of developing legal relationships and contractual relationships, but that these resources are in fact national resources, and they must redound to the benefit of the people for whom they are the patrimony. And so I have said then at the launch of the GEITI that in my responsibility for governance, I'd like to see first and foremost a government structure where officials are accountable. Hence the early moves to have constitutional reform, to make sure that from the very top you do not carry the baggage of executive excesses, that you should have political one-manship, and that your constitution ought to be able to guarantee all people that there will be no tendency towards, nor ought there be practices of authoritarianism. And so that's where I believe that we have to look at our oil and gas resources with regards to the nature of governance that we have in our country. You may read in the newspaper very recently some furore with regards to the code of conduct for government ministers and holder of public office. We are very uncompromising as regards the avoidance of sleaze and malfeasance in public office. Too many stories have already been told in the world about the resource curse of countries that had been endowed richly with oil and gas resources, and their political and governance system bred a disease that deny ultimately the benefits of the resources to the people. And so while we can understand that there would be resistance by persons in public offices, including ministers and members of parliament, and including the president and the prime minister, there could be some level of resistance to the declaration of assets to avoid anyone in governance sneaking through the back door, side agreements and side benefits that result in unjust enrichment and perhaps disproportionate wealth. We have to push through with this agenda to ensure that there is public accountability, and the government ought to be able to set the example. So today I also welcome initiatives in this direction, that you have now a Guyana Oil and Gas Association of social partners that would guarantee that there would be no political manipulation of organizations such as this, that they could seek out relationships and alliances from wherever they could to help to improve our practices from the beginning. I read in the newspaper, former Minister of Energy of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Ramarine, saying we must get it right from the beginning. And I fully agree with that. that we have to get it right from the beginning, to set up our relationships and in such a way that there would be no suspicion that the operations in Guyana, offshore and perhaps later onshore, and maybe perhaps in the arena of oil refinery, that you have national and international buy-in with best practices. I've also wished to commend on the assurance given by Minister Trotman that there would be a special fund would be set up. There has been a big debate about such a fund, who should run it, what purposes it ought to be used, the sovereign wealth fund, and we endorse fully, our government, that a proportion of the proceeds from this new industry should go towards, one, the future of our country, to be invested in the development of strategically necessary resources, infrastructure, and in the education and health of our people, and not just be accessed willy-nilly as opportunities present themselves by governments that only think not about the future but to think about the next elections. I've read many years ago that I'm told that a politician looks at the next elections, but a statesman looked at the next generation. And so we like our resources to spread into the future and not just be gobbled up by any administration that would feel that the resources could be deployed, or the proceeds from the industry could be deployed for short-term gains of buying votes. It must not transform into votes, it must transform into a viable future. So you're the experts here, and all we can say is that we know that it's a great responsibility on the part of our administration to be able to deal with many organizations, many bodies that will come to tell us how it ought to be done. And we are all, we have open ears to listen to what you say and to learn from you. This is a learning experience for us. And while we may feel very elevated in the world arena today to be described as the new frontier for oil and gas, we are also very cautious that we shouldn't allow ourselves to be so carried away as to look at our potential wealth with arrogance and that we have arrived there. In my view, oil and gas is just as important as any other sector of the economy, particularly the sector that would provide social benefits by way of job opportunities, by way of sustainable livelihood. And I'm conscious that while we speak about local content in oil and gas, I'm very, very conscious that the industry itself would be unable to provide employment at a level that would cater for the needs of our young people in particular. So that we have to look at how we develop an integrated economy and not allow us disproportionately to concentrate on oil and gas and neglect our agro potential, our potential for aquaculture, for fisheries. When I was on the rig, I looked over the rails long enough to see the fish, dolphins, you have tuna, and there was a technician who was describing the variety of fish stock that we have even around the rig. That I thought that maybe, yes, it may be dangerous to do fishing from the rig itself, but at least we have a view of our potential. And not only our potential, there is perhaps out of me as a literary person, a view of how beautiful we have found our country to be, because we have grown up describing to the world that Guyana is a mudflat. We have seen the excesses from the Amazon contaminating our shores, and when you go over to the rig, you see Guyana transcending into a little green and then blue waters. And so for me, it was like an elevation of the spirit, that we too can say we have blue waters, like the rest of our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. So there is much that we could integrate with resources from oil and gas to be able to develop the infrastructure that would allow us to become, as Guyana was once, at one time, the food basket of the Caribbean, the fish bowl of the Caribbean. We can become the guarantor of food security, which is perhaps one of the problems that had been discovered in many countries with oil and gas potentials, that they have not developed their alternative resources with the proceeds from oil and gas. And so we see today a challenging future for all of us, because, as you know, sugar is facing a tremendous challenge, and we have to transform our sugar industry, but we simply don't have the resources to do so. Thousands of workers and their families are dependent upon the sugar industry, and so we would want to, as we modernize and diversify areas that had been hitherto in sugar, that we look to other areas, rice, orchards, apiculture, aquaculture, that all of these must now be integrated with the oil and gas industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd rather like to have been sitting with you to listen to the experts and listen to the learned opinions of many of you here who traveled from many countries to be with us, rather than speaking as a politician on a platform that perhaps would be more suitable for a technical person to speak to the issues of the oil and gas industry. Once again, I want to thank my good friend Nigel Hughes for inviting me to this function. I recall perhaps some years ago when he told me he was going to Canada to attend some oil and gas exposition. I felt at that time that he was doing so as a lawyer, looking for new clients. But that was some years ago, even before ExxonMobil announced its massive find of 1.2 billion barrels of potentials, of course, of the Stabroek block and other blocks on the exploration. So I want to also thank him for his vision that we couldn't avoid being involved in oil and gas, and therefore the learning experience must begin even before the discovery, and it must continue even as we lay down the plans to bring the laws. I know Minister Trotman has sent to me a piece of legislation in draft to set up a petroleum commission, and he's working on other pieces of legislation to give legal protection for this industry. I know that we need to continue the learning process, to continue the education, and to ensure that the learning that flows within these walls are made available to the people of Guyana, made available to the students in the school, so they learn also, as we develop our resources, that there is a stake in it, in them, for them as well, and that their future would depend on how best we manage, develop the oil and gas sector, and how we use it as a tool of transformation of our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for having graced us and having taken time out of your busy schedule to be with us this morning. I don't know if we will indulge the Prime Minister. He has other commitments as he leaves before we proceed. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome and thank the Prime Minister.